Philippine investigators have summoned Vice President Sara Duterte over an alleged threat that she made to have the president, now that's Ferdinand Marcos Jr, assassinated. She has been ordered to explain herself and give evidence on Friday, as well as present what she says she sees as credible threats to herself and her staff. Ms Duterte told reporters over the weekend that she had instructed someone to kill Mr. Marcos should she herself be killed. She said she was the subject of an assassination plot. The threat that Ms Duterte is alleged to have made also named the First Lady and the House Speaker, how he is also related to the Marcos family. Ms Duterte insists her comments were taken out of context, adding that she sees accusations against her as a farce and that she had only spoken out of her dismay at what she sees as the Marcos administration's failure, quote, to serve the Filipinos while it masterfully persecutes political enemies. The Department of Justice says the probe could lead to an eventual prosecution, describing Ms Duterte as, quote, a self-confessed mastermind of the alleged plot. The threats could also result in impeachment proceedings against her in the lower chamber of Congress. Developments in just the last few days further indicating how far the Marcos Duterte alliance has weakened, or since the pair united for a landslide victory in elections just 2 years ago, which they ran then under a banner of unity. And for more, Buena Bernal joins us live from Metro Manila. Buena, the subpoena has been served on Ms Duterte, so she has to answer questions on Friday. What else will happen at this hearing on Friday?
Well, when it comes to Philippine politics, what happens next is really subject to unexpected plot twists. But ideally, the vice president would have to appear before the National Bureau of Investigation, the country's premier investigative agency. The directive is for her to appear 9 a.m. local time on Friday. But remember that the vice president has actually been previously invited by a legislative panel probing the use of her funds under the office of the vice president and under the Department of Education, which she previously led prior to her resignation from the Marcos cabinet. And she declined that invitation, explaining in a letter that she doesn't believe that panel's hearings have any legislative value because the extent of the power of that committee is really to investigate in aid of legislation. But this time around, remember, this is a summons by an investigative agency which has the power to file charges before the Justice Department, and she is being investigated this time around for grave threat, a crime punishable under the Philippines revised penal code. Of course, Vice President Duterte explaining in a statement that this statement of hers has no bone in the flesh, she says, and she's also crying foul over what she sees as political persecution by the Marcoses, even alluding to history when she says that the Marcoses are responsible for the death of a political rival of the president's father, the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos Sr., back, of course, who ousted nearly 40 years ago, that led to the restoration of democracy here in the Philippines. Now, of course, undeniably, the timing of the congressional hearings on the use of funds of the vice president came amid this Marcos Duterte spat.
No, but no, of course, it's not just Mr. Marcos who has a father, a former president for a father. Ms. Duterte herself, of course, her father is Rodrigo Duterte, who came out last night, a posting on Facebook late last night, calling for the military to protect the Constitution and correct what he calls a fractured governance in the Philippines today. But he's added he is not calling for any kind of military coup. So what is Mr. Duterte asking for in this posting late last night on Facebook?
Well, the communication style of the former President Rodrigo Duterte is really one of ambiguity, so that later on he can backtrack some of the pronouncements that he makes. But the office of the president, through the executive secretary Lucas Bersamin, actually tagged this call from the former president as being of great evil. He said, Mr. Bersamin said, that there is nothing more selfish than calling for the overthrow of the current president if your daughter is the vice president. Of course, the irony here is that it was actually Mr. Duterte during his presidency that caused a heightened level of loyalty coming from Philippine troops because of the higher pay of people in government at that time implemented during his term, and security officials telling me that there has been less adventurism in the Philippine security establishment because of that. The Philippines, of course, having gone through mutinies in the past, where its central figures later on became high-ranking elected government officials. The other irony here, of course, is that the same criticism has been lodged against Mr. Duterte. The criticism that the vice president is doing, lodging against the Marcoses, which is using government machinery to persecute political opponents, the most high-profile of which is a fierce Duterte critic, former Senator Laila de Lima, who was jailed for nearly 7 years for alleged involvement in the illegal drug trade in the National Penitentiary, but now witnesses have recanted their testimonies. And so what we're seeing here is this verbal, toxic tit-for-tat between the tandem that ran in the 2022 elections under that theme of unity.
Oh, thanks for that. Buena Bernal there reporting on that toxic tit-for-tat, reporting there from Metro Manila.